Hey, y'all. Happy Baby Friday. Welcome to another episode of Healthcare Happenings, coming to find out what's happening in healthcare for the broadcast. Today, I am very pleased to welcome my new friend and colleague, Kim Montenegro. She has been in healthcare to some capacity since her teens. Her first job was at an animal emergency center. That's so cool. She then went to work for a private practice where she worked with humans. And then throughout the years, she's worked from patient registration, billing, coding, auditing, provider education, teaching medical billing and coding at a vocational school. And now she's an HCC educator and a subject matter expert, or a SME, as you've heard those comments going out, for a healthcare IT company in Denver. So welcome, Kim. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And I see already we have Lady. Hey, Lady, how are you? She's one of our regular listeners out in California. We have somebody from New York. And Lady says she can't see me, so I don't know why, because I'm showing up on my screen. So hopefully she can see me now. So we have somebody from North Carolina. It's Allison. Hey, Allison. Jacob, hi. So what we're going to do today is talk about HCCs. Kim being a SME on the subject and an educator, I thought she would be a great fit for our discussion today. And before we get started in our discussion, I started a new thing. I had Christine Hall as a guest, and Christine always likes to do like what national day it is, like National Dog Day or National, So when she was on, I did a This Day in History. So I thought, when there was interesting things, I'd kind of throw those things in there. So today in history in 1939, Germany invaded Poland, sparking World War II. So that was kind of a dark day in history. But some lighter things in 1972, Bobby Fischer beat Boris Spassky, and he became the first American native-born man to be the world chess champion. So I thought that was interesting. And in 1985, on this day, an American oceanographer, Robert Ballard, found the Titanic. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. Now that's one of those movies I know people always go, "Oh my gosh!" That's one that I've never seen. It was just too mushy at the beginning for me. I don't. Jennifer McNamara made a comment once about Forrest Gump. She made a reference to it. And that's another movie that I have never seen. And people always, with those two movies, especially, they're just like, "You're kidding me." So, I'm more of a Stephen King, horror kind of girl. So those just did not spark my interest, but I'll have to get them in there sometime. So Lady, she can't see either of us. No, our cameras are on. So I think it must be something on your end, because I'm looking at us on LinkedIn and we are on there. So Eileen says she can't see it either. So I don't know why they can't see us, because I can see us. So we'll just continue to go here and let me know if those problems persist for y'all. So what we wanted to talk about, or what I wanted to talk about today, was HCCs, because that's something that we haven't addressed on the show before, and it's something that is more and more prevalent in healthcare now as people are moving more into value-based care and risk adjustment and all those kind of things. So people get more of an idea of who you are and what you do, Kim, besides that lovely little intro that I gave. How long have you been involved with HCCs specifically?
So, with HCC specifically, actually, only since 2020, September of
Okay.
2020. Yeah, prior to that, it was basically surgical coding and, of course, education and auditing. But yeah, back in 2020, I was approached by one of my former APC board members, another reason network, and
Yep.
she said she needed to fill a position, and I was definitely ready for change. I had heard about HCC, read about HCC, attended lectures on HCC coding for a while because it was always like, okay, this is up and coming. And when the opportunity presented itself, I was like, okay, let's do it. And within 4 months of starting that job, I sat for the CRC, got my CRC, and I've really been loving it. It's definitely different from pretty much everything else I was doing because when you're when you're doing surgical coding, especially ortho, it's like what tendon here, what tendon there. Versus with HCC, you're kind of just all over the place, but focusing, on the HCCs. And it feels like I can focus my time more on that, as in having to split between CPT and everything else.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, so with the new with that company that brought me on board, I was doing provider education, and that, oh my gosh, I just love the education part.
Yes. So it is what do you like most about HCCs then? Is it the broad base of it?
So it's the broad base, but I also really like the financial aspect of it in the sense of um, what most of my experience, and I guess most of all of our experience, has been in the fee for service world. And for years, I've always followed, how unmanageable the fee for service, if it were not to change, would continue to be. It would just keep on, exploding.
Yeah.
And when it came to HCC, I was like, oh my gosh, there is actually a way to possibly quantify and prognosticate how much the future expenditure is for this patient if we are actually given the opportunity to look at the patient in their entirety, and not just on the, oh, they broke their leg and let's move on to the next. So yeah, I found that just in HCC just being so much more comprehensive.
What do you like about educating?
Oh wow, I'm like, where to start with that?
I know I love the education part myself. What I love is working with people yeah, and I like working with the different groups. With the coders and the billers, they're more focused on getting the code and getting that stuff right. And when I work with physicians, I like working with the documentation points and, here's how to improve it to support what they're looking for when they do it. So I kind of like that interaction on different levels from different sides of it. So what is it that you kind of, get jazzed about?
So I'll also tier it into three different categories. So what I love about educating with providers is, one of all, being able to just review the documentation and show them where they're amazing with documentation, because we all have doctors that are just like amazing in these areas, and then they may be lacking in another. And so just being able to highlight that to them on, you're this close to, hitting it. And it's just so much more manageable than just going and saying, you suck, because that's not it at all.
And it's not real helpful.
It is
And
not.
then
Yeah.
they get defensive, and then you have that whole, little hole to ditch, to dig out of.
Yeah, and so I forgot who it was that said, "Bring Skittle," when you educate providers, and even though it's not policy Skittles, but it was always like, "Hey, let's catch up from last time. How was your golf game?" And, stuff like that, and then
Yep.
we'll do some education, and I rarely, rarely, rarely did it ever happen where when I walked away I was like, "Oh, this is horrible." I know that was, like, more the exception than the rule. So then the
Yes.
next tier would be educating, fellow coders, and I had never really thought about it, but there are so many coders out there that they work for independent practices, and they are the biller, the coder, the auditor, and in our world, we always second guess ourselves because I to a certain point we should.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's nice to be able to go into practice and be able to be like, this was fantastic. And I over here, you could have improved in this other arena. And I think that I've always had positive feedback with that, and the sense that, okay, they may have been on an island, but now they have like somebody that they can reach out to.
Yeah.
So that's very fulfilling. And when I used to teach at the vocational college, oh my gosh, that's life transforming. I will admit it was a little bit of a mixed bag because anybody could apply for the course, and
Okay.
unfortunately, daytime TV is like, oh yeah, you can do this in your sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And make $80,000 in your first month.
yeah, oh my gosh. And so after dispelling that myth, it was like, okay, we all moved forward. It was good. And it's always exciting when my former students reach out to me, or else I just see them like, at a conference or
Yeah.
hospital. It's like, yes.
Yeah, I always I'm a lot of I'm a tweaker. I always like to say, oh, we've got it, almost there. We just have to tweak this a little bit, tweak that a little bit, so it doesn't seem like it's such a big daunting thing. Like I got everything wrong. So I definitely agree with you there. You got to put a little sugar in there,
Absolutely.
when you're working through, because it can get discouraging, especially when you take on a new specialty or a new subject or something like that, and it's you're so used to, oh, I know all these codes off the top of my head, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't know what that is and that is, and you know um like when we switched to ICD-10, that
Mhm.
was such a big thing for people because they could spit ICD-9 codes out in their sleep of what their specialty area was. And all of a sudden, there's now almost 70,000 ICD-10 codes. And it's like, oh, okay. And then the alphanumeric. And, so that was a big jump for a lot of people to where most coders felt uncomfortable. And so it felt good to kind of help them and teach them little tricks about, where things were, and how to remember things. And, as I was going through, I would do like the C codes, or where the neoplasm C is for cancer, D, and so we do little things like that to kind of help, with when they would get into things, to make little, uh,
Mnemonic devices.
yeah, for them. So yeah, I'm totally into the education piece. Oh, and we got a nice comment here I wanted to show you from Lady. She said, Kim, I love you. This is the first time I hear you, and honestly, your experience is impressive. And then
Hi.
something that I can't
Orgullosa de ti. Hi, lady. I love that article in APC, by the way, the Healthcare Monthly.
Yes,
So,
that was very good when she was highlighted in there. So yes,
yeah.
I love having Lady on our talks. So
And oh, sorry, and real
go ahead.
safety. So just so you know what she's said at
Yes.
the bottom, orgullosa de ti means proud of you in Spanish.
Oh, that's so
So
nice.
I'm like,
Um,
oh,
just as usual, too, I want to tell people to start, putting questions in the comment section as we're going through, so that, we can get to address them either as we're talking about subjects, or at the end, when we have some time left over, we've got stuff already keyed up for us. So if you have some questions as we're talking, go ahead and throw them up in the comments, so that we can address as many as possible in our time today. So now that people are a little bit more comfortable with you, Kim, and I wanted to kind of move into like HCCs, what our topic is today. So first, just what I pulled up some other information too. So HCCs, they're hierarchical condition categories. I always have trouble with hierarchical, so I had to slow down. Um, so, what are HCCs? Besides the sets of medical codes linked to specific clinical diagnoses. So, what is the purpose of HCCs?
so HCCs, they're So I'll just start from the top. There are about 11,000 HCCs. Once we start analyzing the CMS model, prescription models, some black box models, and commercial, so ACA plans. Um, each of these codes, they're mostly for chronic conditions. However, there are some acute conditions such as sepsis and some types of pneumonia that fall under these categories. And they fall under general categories. So, for example, if we're looking at the CMS model, uh, diabetes no complication falls under like a category 19. Diabetes with complications falls under an 18. And so when we're looking at stuff like this, each of those categories and the codes that fall underneath, like the complications, acute versus chronic, that's another thing too. Um, those are going to have different values attached to them. And so every year, these should be reported because these are conditions that um, providers need to be addressing to make sure that the patient is managing their health conditions. And so in that year period, the numbers are going to be tallied based on what categories were reported. And that is part of the way that they start projecting out for how much should be budgeted towards this patient's care. And also for these plans, how much the doctors should be getting to take care of that provider during that given point in time, which makes coding accuracy absolutely crucial. Because if you're trying to plan out somebody's finances for the following year and any of this is undercoded or the doctor is underreporting, they can be shooting themselves in the foot by that.
And with HCCs, what you're gathering and reporting for this year is going to project and fall into what you get paid the following year,
That is
right?
correct. Yes.
So it's, you're playing that, not game, but I mean, you're really, the shooting yourself in the foot, is coming in the future. And I think sometimes that's where HCC stuff maybe fall a little bit because they're not seeing an immediate impact. But then the next year it's like, hey, what happened? Well, last year, we weren't documenting how we should, and we weren't picking the stuff up like we could have because, we got a little lax. So
Mhm.
I think that's kind of an interesting point to try to keep in front of the physicians and the APPs is that, we're not looking for stuff that's affecting you right now. This is going to be coming down the pike. So we have to make sure we're consistent always so that we don't see a big dip in a year, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
And with the HCCs, you were talking about the CMS HCCs, but we do have two different types. You have the CMS HCCs,
Mhm.
but then when they did the Obamacare, the ACA, whatever you want to call it, they started bringing in the same kinds of risk things. And so they look at those some more acute conditions, right? So they have the HHS HCCs, talk about tongue tied. You're doing all these. You actually have two different types. And do you find that, is that difficult when you're looking at things that, is this a CMS case or is this an HHS case? Or when you're in it, you're just looking at the documentation so it really doesn't figure in your head at that point? I'm just curious.
So when I was doing the chart review for my former employer, the advantage that we had was that we were only looking for Medicare Advantage cases at the time. So we only had one risk model to focus on. And that really simplified the process because you're right. When it comes to like the ACA plans, asthma is one example. There are some types of asthma that risk adjust in the ACA model, but don't under the CMS model. And so, I remember my first week on the job, I basically just sat there looking at the CMS categories. Of course, I couldn't memorize every single one of them, but it was like, okay, in general, this is what I'm looking at. And so that was one way that we simplified, that the company simplified that process.
Do you see in places where they do deal with both that they compartmentalize the code, and say you concentrate on the CMS HCCs and you concentrate on the HHS HCCs to kind of, deal with that issue?
So actually, what I've come across is whenever I start asking, so when I was trying to educate myself on everything HCC related, and I started asking about ACA models, and this was just a general question to not just people that I worked with, but people that I would meet at conferences.
Mm-hmm.
I would constantly hear the statement of, "Oh, we don't have too much information on ACA," which I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. But then the logic behind it that somebody told me was lots of folks with ACA plans, they drop the insurance like almost immediately. So they'll sign up, get a surgery or, whatever treatment they want and then dump it just so they're in compliance to, I guess, when they file. And so this individual at a conference told me that that was a reason why so much less focus was put on ACA. So what I've done on my side, now that I'm with a different employer is, um, I'm literally going through all 11,000 codes one by one and breaking them into different categories so that way hopefully upon implementation of part of the project that we're looking at, it takes the guesswork out of what what a coder or even a physician would be looking at, because it would automatically populate. And I mean, there's like so many little nuances on this. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry to be a little vague on that.
No, no, I know we're talking like overview type things because it's
Yeah.
real hard when it's such an in the weeds, minutia you can get into that,
Mhm.
it's an hour just is not enough time to do all this. So we're just trying to get
Exactly.
kind of big idea things here.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, I'll just say also too about HCCs, that's part of what I love about all this because it's kind of like playing Tetris with ICD-10.
Yes.
'Cause yeah, it's like move it here, move it there. It adjusts in this one, does not adjust in the other. And I mean, it makes for a full day of brain work.
Yes, you have to have your thinking cap on when you sit down to do these things. So that's another, and I think that's a good thing for coders and auditors that may be looking at doing this, that when they say, okay, well, I've been doing this thing over here for 10 years, 15 years, whatever, and, I'm just really bored and I want something, this is different. And this, makes you have that concentration on it. It's not something that you're just like winging through when you're doing it. So there's a lot of attention to detail and
Oh,
a lot of
absolutely.
your, brain power going into it. So it is something that will fully encompass you while you're doing it.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yes.
And then with the HCCs comes the RAF, the risk
Mhm.
adjustment factor score, right? So that's
Correct.
something else. It's not just what category it falls into. Then we have these scores that come along with it. And that's how we get to that issue of what that payment is going to be for that patient for the year, correct?
Correct. And actually, we break RAF out into a couple of different categories. So you have the RAF that's dependent on the diagnostic coding, which is what I was talking about previously, where we're looking at the codes and everything falls under a category with the value on it. And then the other part of it deals with the patient. Are they in an institution? Did they age into let's say CMS? Did they age into Medicare, or they there because of a disability? Is it male, female? Age. I mean, so many. I am a few. I think it's like five different categories. Right now, I think I did all five categories.
So, what I put, so we have the disease burden,
Mhm.
which would be and then their demographic info. So, that
Yes,
pieces out into the things you were discussing about their age and where they are and all those kind of things that they use to calculate those payments to the healthcare organizations, which then flow down to the physicians.
correct. The one I was forgetting is whether or not they're dual eligible.
Oh, that's yes, the medi as they
Many,
like to
many.
say, medi. So with the RAF scores, depending how it comes out, the RAF score itself indicates whether the patient is
High
regular risk or high risk, or where they. So when you're coming into the RAF, again, and correct me if my information is off, but the RAF score of 1.00 is an average
Mhm.
amount of resources, right? That's considered an average patient. So
Yes,
anything
that's
above a 1.00, that patient's considered or indicates that they could be a high risk patient.
yes, that's my understanding of it as well. One is the normalizer, and yeah, and everything on top of that is, well, you need help.
Okay. I always need help. So that's
I'm going to say that describes me.
so with the HCCs in talking about all these moving parts, are there any like hot topics or big things right now that are kind of like the hot issue for HCCs, anything like that that people are looking at or that you're seeing in, articles or concentration from, the payors that you're hearing from CMS on HCCs, any kind of new news?
I don't know so much if it's new news, but the constant is always we need to train our providers to document uh, thoroughly regarding their patients' medical conditions. Um, most providers, they're used to documenting for fee for service, where an example could be the patient came in because of, I don't know, asthma exacerbation.
Mhm.
And they give that patient like prednisone, for example. However, they fail to document that the patient's diabetic and that the prednisone is going to is expected to increase their normal blood sugars. And that would have been a missed opportunity to document that the patient was diabetic. And if that patient already had some other complication associated with that diabetes, the interaction on that, one thing I forgot to mention on that RAF calculation is when interactions are documented, we provider gets
Increase
extra points for
score.
that.
Yep.
Yes.
So,
And
yeah,
so,
go ahead.
oh, no, I was actually done.
Oh, I was just going to say it's from working with physicians and APPs, back in the day, like I'm an old hen. We had one episode where I had some of my old hen friends on. So I've been here for over 30 years, and we physicians on the pro fee side, it was always about the CPT code, because you got paid off the CPT. So that's what they were concentrating on. That's where their documentation was concentrated on. In fact, when I started back in the 80s. So again, yes, y'all, I'm that old. When we started back in the 80s, we could actually, I was an x-ray tech. And I moved into this position because I didn't want to do that anymore. And I would look, and at that point back then, our claims all dropped on Friday. So we would have up until Thursday to try to figure out like what the correct ICD-9 codes were and the correct CPT. We had some time to play with stuff before claim day came. Um, and that's also too, y'all that are listening, and that's when they came out from the we had the printers, and you would hear the printers run all day, and then we had to hand sign the claim forms, and we had gotten off the typewriter, but I did have to type some of them. So it wasn't all electronic and nice like it is today. So but if I couldn't figure out an ICD-9 code, I didn't feel it was right just to put something on there. So I would send out a claim with no ICD-9 code, and we would get paid. You didn't have to have one back then. So for me, it was just great. I was like, well, I don't know. I'll just send the CPT. I know the CPT culture. I will just send that. And, but of course we can't do that anymore. But we really weren't on the pro fee side concentrating on ICD-9 like they did on the facility side. And we kind of got away with that for a long time. And when we did have to have ICD-9 codes, there was a lot of unspecified going out, and it really didn't make a difference. Then they started coming with medical necessity denials, and then it started to make a difference. And then now with the HCCs, it makes a huge difference. So again, there's another one of those things where we're talking about that shift, right? In
Absolutely.
concentration. And so talking to the docs today is a lot different than how we used to, talk to them and tell them what they had to concentrate on. So, it's critically important, and that's something now when I work and speak, just from if they're not involved in any kind of risk adjustment or that's not what we're discussing, then I fall back to the medical necessity issue of, there's denials coming for these unspecified. I'm sorry, if the codes have laterality, a right, a left, and a bilateral, and you're trying to tell me that you don't know which arm it was or which leg it was, I'm just not buying it. That's just lazy. We have to get better at those types of things. And now, if you get into risk adjustment, and a lot of places are, it's just feeding and making that even more of an issue that has to be paid attention to now. It's not just a second nature. Oh yeah, just whatever. Just this one is okay. No, that's not, not if you want to stay in business, because you're not going to get paid correctly.
Exactly. And like you were saying, the trend right now is moving as much as possible to a value-based care system where we can, do these calculations in advance. And also, one component of of being a value-based system is when you have doctors within your small network of providers where you're sending your patients to, everybody has a shared risk on that. So if any of the providers fail to document, that could potentially affect everybody who's involved in that. So it's not no longer, well, I didn't do it. That's just me, that's out there
Mhm.
hurting myself. It's no, now I'm going to affect somebody. I can potentially affect somebody else's revenue in this process. And nobody wants to play with that person in that playground.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, especially like you're saying, when you're in a group, it's not just your revenue, it's the whole group and moving forward. And I always tell physicians and APPs when I'm working with them too, is like, if you want to keep your doors open, if you want to get new equipment, if you want to, do these new treatment, that stuff, Jordan Johnson has a saying I love to: no money, no mission, right? I mean, you got to bring it in to be able to do those things that you want to do to take care of your patients. And that all funnels back to documentation.
Yes.
So, and that all goes to whoever is that physician or APP, whoever that provider is that's doing that service. They've got to get better at it. And they're making strides, I will say. I mean, I remember back in the old, before we had EHRs and EMRs and all that, when we had the handwritten charts, and everything would all chicken scratch and scribble, and so I mean, things have progressed, but we still have a long way to go with documentation to be complete. And that's, I think, from our profession, where we've now gotten the CDI,
Yes.
leg of the profession to kind of help. So I think we're all concentrating on it, and we're getting there, but we got to keep at it. Do you see that with like the newer docs, that I know they're used to more of the templated EHR kind of thing. And so now I'm telling them it's, no longer about your history and exam. What we're concentrating on is your assessment and plan. So, that's where your gold is, So, when you're giving a diagnosis and listing them out, specifically what is it, if they have complications, if you're listing four things and two of them could be related, but you don't tell me they're related, we're going to have an issue. You know, Sometimes in ICD-10, we can assume a relationship, right? But sometimes we can't.
Yeah,
So they have to make that connection.
absolutely. Yeah. And whenever I've done auditing for providers, I've always told them it is best practice to spell out your logic versus have an auditor try to conclude about your logic.
Yeah.
Because yeah, it needs to be clear.
And I always tell them too that a payor, if they request a record, a payor is not going to assume that it's in your favor.
Exactly.
A payor is going to say, this is what it says. And it didn't say that there was so no, you're not getting credit for it. And, and that's where I think sometimes, and I talk about this a lot with having those external auditors, external reviewers take a look at your stuff, because your internal people may say, oh, I know what they meant.
Yeah.
And I know that this is what that patient has. I know that patient,
Yeah.
whereas somebody from the outside looking said, that's not what the record says. It has to say that, it has to connect for us.
Yeah, and that's absolutely correct. It's always good to have outside eyes. Earlier this week, I was at the collaborative compliance conference, and that was one of the topics that they brought in on. You never, ever, ever want your coder to be their own auditor
Yes.
because we will always say that we rock. And
Yes.
we
Yes.
do need to have some outside eyes. Um, and it's not so much because things have gone bad, but
Right.
we don't want to find out that things have gone bad once they've gone bad,
Yeah.
because it can
Yeah.
only get worse from there.
Yeah. And you don't want that coming from the payor. You'd rather have it coming from somewhere else first so that you can shore it up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you hire a consultant to come in to review your stuff, there are ways for it to go through an attorney-client privilege section. So
Yep.
that way, if you're suspecting something, I, it's worth the money. It is so worth the money.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because a lot of times I find stuff that, that they didn't realize that they could be coding, or they didn't, so there's also that factor too,
Yeah.
because in some of the smaller offices, I find that sometimes the coder, is kind of like, here, you be the coder now. They haven't been properly trained for certain things and stuff
Yeah.
like that. They're kind of like sink or swim, and they're trying their best, but they need some help also,
They
so
do. Yeah, and
yeah,
I always think back of, my first coding job. I wasn't certified. I hadn't opened a coding book until like, years prior, and the doctor had me be his biller and his coder and his credentialer. It was like I was the entire
yeah,
office.
yep,
And that was, so not fair. But
yeah,
talk about trial by fire.
yes,
I'm like, now I'm certified. Because then he would do his, well, you don't know what you're talking about because you're not certified. And I was like, but there are only so many parts in this section of the body that you can code.
mhm, mhm. And
So,
that's again back to the networking thing,
yeah,
because back when I was thrown into it in the 80, we would have, I was part of, I think we had 6 or 7 clinics. I was at a health system, and so we would call each, like, where did you find this? And,
yeah,
do you know where that was? And how did you get that one? And, stuff like that. So that networking piece of it, and having people to call on is extremely important.
yeah. And I'm just thinking back then, my source of reference ironically became a vendor that we were working with. We just developed a friendship, and next thing you know, it was like we became each other's fallback.
Yeah.
because she was also in a similar situation. And I was like, wow. It's, I mean, the more people, my experience has been the more people we help, the more help we get to.
Yep, yep, yep. You can always ask for the favors to be returned.
Yeah.
And you know when you help people and then you ask for there, at least I am. I'm always happy to do it. You
Yes.
know, because I know I'm gonna need help with something. And so when somebody asks me, I'm more than happy to do it if it's under something that I know, you know. But yeah, yeah. I am seeing in the chat some things are coming up about, you know, getting into. Eileen asked, you know, is HCC a hard area of coding to get hired? So that kind of brings me to that next section I wanted to talk about, you know, how does, if there's a person that's a coder, a biller, an auditor, you know, that wants to kind of dip their foot, you know, into the HCC arena, like how do they go about doing that? I know you're an HCC educator, so you know, how would they do that?
I just cannot say strongly enough how important it is to network. Um, I just talk to people at your local chapter. I know at my local chapter, uh, one of the first times I heard about HCC being as in a separate, coding group by itself was by this one gal who just described it, and she says she didn't know much about it, but that to me could have possibly accelerated my stepping into that a few years prior, but I didn't. However, when I got this job, had it not been for me networking, I would have not been on anybody's radar. LinkedIn is also a really, really good source on finding jobs that are HCC related. I know that AAPC and some other entities do conferences specific to risk adjustment and just showing up at these places. The last couple ones, I believe they've been virtual, but some of them are now becoming in person. I know I've been to a few in person ones this year alone. And just getting out there and just talking to people, and even if you're an apprentice, even if you're not certified, you know, creating these connections are gold.
Yes. And then we have kind of a lady has a specific HCC question. Let's see. It says when a patient has multiple conditions under the same category, to calculate the RAF, you only count it one time. Is that correct?
So that is technically correct. So if I have a patient who has, let's just say that they have chronic kidney disease stage one and diabetes, so that would only fall under one category. However, if the patient came back and their kidney condition deteriorated, you definitely want to capture that condition because that is now going to give you, even though it's the same category 18, now you have the added complexity of the interaction and the deterioration of that chronic kidney disease. So you would definitely score higher. And also, you just want to always reflect what the patient's true condition is.
And we have, no, I'm not exactly sure. Eileen asked this question and then she apologized and said she saw, I'm sorry, I'm new to coding, but don't ever be sorry for asking a question. But I don't understand her question. So Eileen, if you could put
I
back in a
think
comment. It,
I think I
if,
understand what
oh,
she's getting
okay.
at. Okay. So, and Eileen, if I'm totally off base, just, give us a little bit more info. But what I think what she is asking is RAF calculated into the E&M value? And no, so the E&M is always going to be represented by that CPT, which is how you know, that gets reimbursed. The RAF is based on the documentation and the diagnostic codes. So in the body of the E&M, of course, that's where the documentation is going to be. That's where your diagnoses are going to be. And so, yes, they kind of work together in a way, but when it comes to calculations, totally separate calculations. I hope that helps.
Okay. That makes sense if that's her question. That would be what her question is, if that makes sense.
I
So
always do shorthand, so I'm like, I think we're speaking the same language.
yes, yeah, and I know, and it's like I know what I'm asking. So and lady, going back to our other discussion, said, yeah, sometimes the coder is the biller, the receptionist, the office manager. So yes, we definitely see that in a lot of the smaller offices. Um,
And also the
and
translator.
yes, yes, definitely. So it was a funny story since you mentioned translator. I took French in high school because I couldn't make the R's in Spanish. You know, that roll, I just couldn't do it. And so I was scared to take Spanish. So I decided I'll take French because their R is like a guttural R. It's like a, it's like you've got
Mhm.
like a cat's got a hairball. And so I took it all through high school. I took it my first year in college, and then, of course, never used it again. Right. And this was probably 20 years later, if not more. I was in a hospital downtown in Chicago, and I was working with one of their coding departments, and a call came in by accident, and it was a woman that was speaking French. And they thought she was speaking Spanish, the person that answered the phone. I don't know how they got those two languages mixed up, but they thought she was speaking Spanish. So they relayed her call to the department I was in because there was a lot of Spanish speaking people that were in that department. So they were like, oh, I'll send them over here and have them help. And so they called in and they said, she's speaking Spanish. Could one of y'all figure out what she, and they said, oh, sure. So the lady starts going, and the lady sitting there, she's going, oh, that's not Spanish. She's like, I don't know what that is. That's not Spanish. And so then they put her on speakerphone. I said, oh, that's French. And they said, oh, do you know French? And I'm like, well, kind of, so they're like, well, just keep her on the phone until we get the French translator then, because they had the service, of course. But they
Yes.
said, we'll call into the service, but until then, keep her on the phone. So I get on the phone with her and I'm like, oh, bonjour, madame. And, so she starts, oh, and I'm like, and I could hear like one or two words. And so I just kept saying, mama, mama. Just like, just hold a minute. I just for like 5 minutes until they got the translator on the phone. So I was just like, whew. So you would not want me to be a translator for you. But lady kindly offered that that she and you can help me with my Spanish.
Absolutely,
So
yes.
I'm doing little bits. I'm got one of those app things on my phone, that Duolingo, that I'm kind of playing
Mhm.
with to try to get my Spanish up a little bit, because I'm in Florida now, and it's very useful to have
Absolutely. Mhm.
that language. French, I mean, it's nice and it's pretty sounding, and I could, if I have a book in French in front of me, I can read it out loud and make it sound beautiful, but I have no idea what it says. And we don't exactly have a big French speaking population here, unless you go to New Orleans, and then you get some of that in there. But otherwise, we're kind of left out. So,
That's
but
hilarious.
yeah,
And I was just going to say, and definitely, if you want help in Spanish, I'm your girl, lady. She's offering to. But I was up in the DR, Dominican Republic,
yes,
and of course, I'm like, okay, lots of this is going to be in Spanish, which, yeah, it's my first language. But what I didn't expect was all the Haitians. And so I'm pretty fluent in French. And so I started talking to this lady. She didn't understand. And then all of a sudden it clicked. And so I just did the switch. And from that moment on, it was like, I think on that trip, I spoke more French than I did Spanish, which was crazy.
yeah,
But languages are so amazing. Kind of segueing back into what our topic is, I got approached by a recruiter um, not too long ago asking for somebody with HCC coding skills, but what's bilingual. because, well, we have Puerto Rico and they also partake in our benefits because they're a U.S. territory,
Right.
and that is all in Spanish. So, if you're a native speaker or if you're fluent, you don't have to be a native speaker, but that's just another opportunity. I mean, just because we are here on, say, the mainland or in this 50 states, I mean, there's opportunities in the territories as well.
So when an HCC auditor goes out, if
Mhm.
they're working, let's say, for a payor, they'll
Mhm.
send them, right, to take a look at the records and to make sure that the HCCs that have been done, that the diagnoses are supported. So
Yeah.
you also have that area, that's open
Mhm.
for for work if you're looking to move into that portion of it, right?
Absolutely, because if any of this goes south and somebody's over documenting or under documenting, it is actually the payer who's on the hook for most of this.
And
And
we've seen a lot of that lately, right?
yes, yes. And of course, the physician and the practice has some responsibility, but who's being penalized is going to be that payer. So it behooves them to make sure that everything is totally kosher.
And from your experience, for payors that are looking for HCC people, do they offer like in-house type of education? Do they, like, if people don't have 4 or 5 year or whatever of HCC experience, if they're a certified coder and are looking to get into that venue, is it where they're looking for bodies that are just teachable too? So if you don't, what I'm asking, I guess, is if you don't have HCC experience, but you see a position open at at a place that is looking for HCC coders, if you're interested in it, are you telling people, well, go ahead and apply, but let
Yeah.
them know and let them know, you're interested, you'd be willing to learn, and all of that kind of stuff.
Definitely. That's exactly what I highly recommend. And when you submit your resume or a cover sheet along with a resume, I always encourage those that I help out in that department to include a line saying willing to work towards CRC within first year of starting. So that way it shows initiative and that that person's not afraid of this. So,
That's a great tip. That's
yeah,
a great tip.
it's huge.
Because I do see that a lot in
Yeah.
some of the ads that are out there. They'll
Mhm.
say, if you don't have this certification, you'll need to have it within 6 months or within a year or whatever.
Right.
So if you
Mhm.
don't see it, that's something good, I think, for you to put out there, that,
Yes.
hey, I'm willing to get it. It's like, for me, I think I have eight eight certifications now, and I'm just like, I really unless it's something super duper important to me, I really don't want to take another test. I really don't, so but for others, those people that may be a little bit younger than myself, or looking to grow what they're doing,
Mhm.
that's something that I think a lot of employers would be happy to see, and see
Mhm.
that they're willing to take that initiative, and they're kind of like a, let's take it,
Yeah.
give it to me, I'll fly with it, kind of thing.
Absolutely, yes. And one thing that I've noticed, I don't want to call this payer out by name, but when I was looking at their career structure, they actually had a very robust search out there for educators. And then when I was looking at their lower tier folks on that career ladder, they were considering apprentices as well. And that I just, just did, I'm helping a couple of my friends find positions right now.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, this is how I did my search. So I was walking them through it. And then next thing I know, I'm like on this crazy rabbit trail on, wow, if only I could clone myself.
Yeah, that's and that's a good thing with the apprentice. This is another area, since it is newer, that I
Mhm.
think would be a good area for an apprentice to look at getting into, because
Yeah,
there's a lot more places, I think, that are open to taking an apprentice, because this is a newer thing in our field.
definitely. With my previous employer, I want to say that, let's see, three of the gals, we were a team of eight. So I guess that's close to half of the team. They actually started out when they were still doing their apprenticeship. And so there are definitely employers out there who are amazing and will work with you. Um, yeah, it's just really a matter of using your network, and yeah, just letting people know that you're excited about, doing something new and different.
Yeah, and I think that's it too. I like to work with people and have people around me that are like jazzed about what they're doing. And I
Yeah,
just want to put, lady, said that you're giving some great tips, and I agree. I hope this part is helpful, talking about this kind of stuff for people. So, oh yeah, and here's another. Shelby says the same thing. So good, good. I'm glad these are good things that are helping. I like to be around, and the people that, for people that have been watching, the broadcast, the guests that I have on, you can tell that it's like that passion, and that, they've really got it for what their subject is. So, I think it's very helpful to have that, and to put that out there, and let people know that you're really jazzed about it.
yeah. And one thing not to do, and I'm only saying this because I had a funny conversation with somebody at a different conference here recently, but please don't go onto the Facebook page, the APC Facebook page, and complain. I mean, it's just, when we remembered these names, and I can totally understand, especially when you're an apprentice. It is so disheartening because we've all
Yeah,
been there, and
yeah,
the rejection after rejection. But I mean, it's just a matter of time. I mean, it's always, okay, well, I remember I was going through this one period at one point in my career where I was like, what is wrong with me? And so I created a list of everybody who I applied for. And um, eventually it was like, oh my gosh, I'm one step closer to the next yes. And it was just like a small shift in dynamic once I literally spelled out who had said no. And now when I turn around, I'm like, I remember those people, those companies. I know hard feelings. It's just oh yeah,
yes,
you want to work with
yeah,
me?
yep. No, I think I'm busy that day. No.
Yeah. I'm teaching
So
Ben
yeah.
Spanish today.
There you go. It's time for my Spanish lesson. Oh, Catherine says that their company, they give people 6 months to get their CRC. So that's good. Yeah, I
Yep.
think if you give people the time, because there are some people that don't realize that this is a thing, that they have the credentials for it, and they have, that kind of thing. So, opening the door for people to say, hey, we'll take you in, and we'll get you ready for it, and you have to do it within the 6 months or within the year, then that gives them a personal goal too, and gets them excited when they're working. So I think it's a win-win on both sides. And then
Absolutely.
Lady says, I enjoyed both of you. Thank you, Lady. Thank you so much for
Thank
sharing your
you.
knowledge with us, Kim. So yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
So, we have come. See, I told you when we were chatting yesterday. I
I
says, I know. See, I always say, I always wonder when we start these. I'm like, how are we going to do an hour out of this? And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh my gosh, it's time. I want to thank you for coming on and talking today, and maybe in the future we can dig in a little bit more to specifics, or just have you back on when I do another networking. I did one on networking a while ago, but when I do the next one, I'll have you come back, because I always like to give tips to people on how to continue networking and things like that to, get those openings and to get those opportunities. So I would love to have you back. Thank you for
Absolutely.
joining me.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for everybody who joined. This is just a great community.
Yes, and thanks everybody for joining us today. And just watch next week for the next healthcare happenings to see what's happening in healthcare. So thanks, y'all, and have a good afternoon.